So when you go browsing for decks, sometimes as you read up on the ad copy, you'll see something along the lines of traditionally cut. Now we've spoken about decks that have a traditional cut before, but we haven't really spoken about whether it's something that's really important or it's something that you have to look forward to when you're looking for playing cards. So this is a video that's going to detail basically, is it really something that you have to look for when you're looking for playing cards? So as a brief reminder, I'll go over what a traditional cut is. When playing cards are actually cut from their sheets, so usually they come from a giant sheet of paper into strips and then into individual playing cards. The blade that cuts the playing cards isn't actually perfectly straight. There's actually just a slight angle to it that, well, causes a modern cut or traditional cut depending on whether the sheet is face up or face down. So what this means is that this basically just affects the direction of your Pharaoh shuffle. If a deck has a modern cut deck will only Pharaoh. Once they're broken in, they can pretty much Pharaoh from both sides, but they will Pharaoh a lot easier from top to bottom with a face down deck, right? But for a traditionally cut deck, you basically can only Pharaoh bottom to top. So you can Pharaoh bottom to top just like so, as opposed to a modern cut deck's top to bottom. And that's pretty much what a traditional cut means. It's basically just a bottom to top Pharaoh, alright? Just like so. Now, for some ad copy, they'll actually sometimes specify traditionally cut for table work. But let's get into some specifics, because what does the cut of a deck actually affect? Does it affect a double lift? Not in particular, that's not really what it affects. How about false steals? Well, also no. Okay, well that was kind of bad, but also no, it doesn't really affect false steals. So what does a traditionally cut deck actually mean? Well, basically the cut of a deck refers exclusively and specifically to Pharaoh shuffles. But why tabled work? Well, in the world of gambling sleight of hand, there's something called the tabled Pharaoh, or the perfect riffle shuffle. So, but how can something be both a Pharaoh and a riffle shuffle? That's because it's really not. So, it's actually the tabled Pharaoh or the perfect riffle shuffle is actually just a Pharaoh shuffle that's deliberately meant to resemble a riffle shuffle. But why? Because you can basically stack cards mathematically using a Pharaoh shuffle. So if I just have two red aces, let's just say for example, just so that's easier to keep track of. If we have two red aces on top, I'm not going to do tabled Pharaohs because I'm not too consistent with them. So I'm just going to do normal Pharaohs. So if I just do a normal Pharaoh shuffle like so, right? One Pharaoh shuffle basically stacks the deck for two players. But if I do two Pharaoh shuffles, sorry, let me just rearrange everything. If I do two Pharaoh shuffles, and I'm going to need to do these perfectly as well. So let's see if I can pull that off. This might be a bit thicker. A bit off. Okay. There, let's do this. If you actually Pharaoh shuffle twice, then you can actually stack for four players. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now we stack for four players. And if you Pharaoh shuffle three times, you stack for 8 players. The problem with that is that other people also know of the Pharaoh shuffle. I can't English apparently. So the problem with that is that other people also know of the Pharaoh shuffle. So you can't openly do an in the hands Pharaoh shuffle because people will then know that you're using the mathematical properties of a Pharaoh shuffle. So usually people will have to disguise it as a tabled Pharaoh. But you can't really use a modern cut deck because you can't exactly do a Pharaoh shuffle with a modern cut deck in this instance because it only shuffles top to bottom, right? Because if I try and do a Pharaoh shuffle from the deck, it won't resemble a riffle shuffle, because a riffle shuffle is bottom to top, right? I can't do that with a Pharaoh shuffle, because then I have to lift these two packets up, so then these two corners intertwine with one another. I have to use a traditionally cut deck, so then I lift these two corners from the table up, and then I riffle them like so. So then I can disguise a Pharaoh shuffle as a riffle shuffle on the table, and it won't work with a modern cut deck. So doing a table Pharaoh or a perfect riffle shuffle requires you to have a traditionally cut deck. And that's pretty much the only reason and the only move as to why you would actually need a traditionally cut deck. Like I said, cuts only affect Pharaoh shuffles, and in most magicians' cases, hiding the Pharaoh shuffle under the guise of a riffle shuffle just isn't really necessary unless you have a gambling theme, right? And it's even made worse by the fact that the table Pharaoh is pretty difficult to get down. Like, I can't do this consistently at all. You probably need someone like Ryan Murray to do the table Pharaoh consistently. And even then, there's basically only mathematical properties or applications for something like this. And even then, again, for most magicians, you can just use an in the hands Pharaoh shuffle. So for most people, for most magicians, a traditional cut is just unnecessary and just extra marketing, unless you really want to do table Pharaohs, or if you have like a gambling theme for a very specific effect. So I remember when I first started out and I was shopping for decks, and I would always hear something along the lines of, oh yeah, traditionally cut decks are for table work. And I just sort of ran with it, I sort of believed it, because, I mean, you know, why not? But then, as I sort of learned more, I sort of just realized that, oh, you know, there's basically only one move that really requires you to have a traditionally cut deck, and that's the, well, table Pharaoh, or the perfect riffle shuffle. Other table moves like mucking, lapping, false deals, false shuffles, and all the other table moves, they don't really require a traditional cut, because none of them really require or depend on the bevel, on the specific bevel of a traditional cut. Again, cuts are only for Pharaoh shuffles. Anything else doesn't really matter. So honestly, unless you want to practice table Pharaohs, which are very fun, which is a very, very fun move, but it's not really like, it's not really practical for a lot of magicians, I feel, unless you do table work, or unless you do specifically gambling theme effects. Unless you have those sorts of things that you want to sort of cater towards to, I really wouldn't deliberately search out traditionally cut cards. But again, it's up to you. I think that there's a sort of appeal to you having traditionally cut cards, because I mean, it is pretty cool to do table Pharaohs. But again, it's up to you. But I wouldn't deliberately search them out, because sometimes they do cost more, just because it's a specific request for people to flip over sheets of playing cards and then get them cut. So yeah, but I think that about wraps it up. Hope this video helps you in searching out decks, and yeah, stay healthy, stay safe, and see you guys next time.